He arrived at the apartment complex on a rainy, neon-lit evening, dragging his meager luggage behind him, wondering if desperation had finally outweighed good sense. The building was a towering mishmash of steel and glass, jam-packed with species he had never seen before, all chattering in languages that sounded like musical instruments colliding. The lobby smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet that made him itch slightly. He had signed a rental agreement for a budget-friendly room, which turned out to be a closet masquerading as a bedroom, complete with a thin mattress and a window that overlooked a bustling alley where aliens of all shapes scuttled, hovered, or slithered about. As he dragged his suitcase inside, the walls vibrated with the hum of conversation and occasional low-frequency growls he suspected were complaints about intergalactic plumbing. The first encounter was immediate. His roommate, the alien girl, was already in the room, perched on the edge of the mattress with limbs that bent in ways humans were never meant to bend. Her skin shimmered subtly, like liquid mercury under the fluorescent lights, and her eyes glowed faintly. She smiled at him and, in a tone that was too casual for what she was about to do, said, "Greetings. I offer the visual introduction." Before he could respond, she began her so-called greeting, unfolding her body with a grace that was terrifying in its completeness, exposing herself entirely. He froze, one hand on the doorknob, the other gripping the strap of his bag like a lifeline, blinking as if closing his eyes could somehow erase what he was seeing. He opened his mouth to protest, to explain modesty, human decency, social norms, but nothing came out. She tilted her head curiously, misinterpreting his stunned silence. "Is it unusual?" "Oh, do not worry. It is normal for my species. Everyone sees everything upon greeting. You will adapt," she said, still fully displayed, her tone like someone describing the weather. He tried to avert his gaze, but the room was too small, and the walls seemed to have an innate ability to reflect the smallest hint of embarrassment. He attempted a defensive maneuver, shoving a nearby towel over himself, but she simply floated closer, apparently oblivious to his frantic gestures, and leaned over, examining the towel as if it were a curious artifact. "Ah, you wear coverings too? How quaint," she said with a tilt of her head. The words were harmless, but the way she said them made it feel like an accusation. Through the thin walls, the neighbors began to take notice. He could hear whispers, alien voices modulating in complex patterns, sometimes laughter, sometimes what sounded suspiciously like the metallic clink of improvised bedding. In the elevator, he had been told, the previous tenants practiced modesty differently, but here, the entire complex was converging toward a single, universal fascination, the human's reaction. He fumbled with his suitcase to create a makeshift barrier, but she simply rearranged herself into a new pose, smiling as if she were showing off an exotic dish rather than violating every human instinct about clothing. He found himself retreating toward the corner, knees almost hitting the wall, realizing that the small room had become a stage, and he had become both audience and unwilling performer. She began gesturing expansively, arms slicing through the air, her movements synchronized in a rhythm he could not anticipate. He flinched at every motion, trying to dodge without acknowledging her presence too aggressively, which only seemed to encourage her. "You are tense," she said. "Relaxation is important in greetings. Observe me fully." He swallowed hard, imagining his neighbors pressed against their doors, peeking through their respective windows, and probably recording everything for interplanetary gossip forums. He could already feel the sting of embarrassment, and the impending viral fame among alien networks. His hand grasped the small potted plant he had placed on the nightstand in a futile attempt to shield himself. She noticed and raised an eyebrow, if she had one, which she didn't really in human terms, and made a deliberate, almost performative flourish with her hand, revealing herself in even more elaborate ways. He tried reasoning aloud. "Look, humans we don't greet people like this." His voice cracked. She tilted her head, processing, as if he had said, "The sky is turquoise," or, "Gravity is optional. Humans have coverings," he continued, flailing slightly. "It's, traditional too." He stopped. The words sounded ridiculous even to him, and she laughed, a tinkling, melodic sound that made the walls vibrate. Ah, playful resistance. Excellent. Trust is built through exposure and reaction. You are already learning. She leaned closer, glancing at his towel with curious admiration. Interesting fabric choice. Terribly effective at hiding only some parts. Clever, clever. He wanted to scream, to escape, to bolt for the stairs and take the first public shuttle back to a planet with fewer interspecies nudity norms. But he froze as the sheer absurdity of the situation hit him. Somewhere between panic and disbelief, a small, guilty flicker of admiration formed for her audacious confidence. A knock at the door startled him. He yelped. She giggled. Visitors? She asked. Perfect. Everyone should meet immediately. Sharing is polite. Through the crack of the door, he caught glimpses of a tentacle neighbor, a floating jellyfish-shaped inspector, and a hovering orb that looked suspiciously like it had eyes. They were all staring in fascination, clearly trying to interpret the greeting through the lens of their own cultural understanding. He imagined their thoughts. The human is either insane, exceptionally brave, or utterly bewitched. He shoved the towel up around his shoulders like a makeshift cloak, stepping behind the bed for cover, while she greeted each onlooker with a dramatic flourish of limbs and shimmer. By the end of the evening, the human was crouched on the floor, sweating in exasperation, wondering how he had ended up living with a creature that considered nudity an essential part of friendship. The alien girl perched on the bed, looking like a radiant, otherworldly statue, completely at ease with the chaos she had created. He peeked around the edge of the towel, begrudgingly noting her grace, and perhaps, in some deeply human way, beginning to understand that navigating this world would require more humor, more resilience, and maybe, just maybe, more admiration than he had anticipated. She clapped her hands softly, floating down to crouch in front of him, still smiling. Tomorrow, we begin proper training. Visual greetings are just the start. You will excel. He groaned, realizing that there would be no escape from absurdity, no retreat from her charm, and certainly no private moment without unintentional exposure. The rain outside had stopped, leaving neon reflections on the wet streets below, but inside, the storm of embarrassment, curiosity, and the first flickers of attraction had only just begun. The next morning, the apartment complex was alive with noise. Doors slid open and closed, alien voices echoed through the narrow hallways, and somewhere above, a drone-like inspector hummed as it floated past, scanning for compliance violations. He had barely slept, curled in a corner with a blanket that did nothing to protect his dignity. The alien girl was already up, stretching in ways that made him flinch repeatedly. Her movements were effortless, fluid, as though gravity itself were a polite suggestion she could ignore, and she greeted him with a bright, innocent smile. Time for proper training, she announced cheerfully, eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. The human groaned, clutching the blanket around himself like armor. He could feel his pulse racing at the thought of another round of visual greetings. She twirled in place, landing elegantly on the small mattress, and gestured toward him. Observe and participate, she said, her tone calm, as if she were asking him to tie his shoes rather than prepare for total mortification. He swallowed hard, trying to explain that he wasn't ready, that humans had strict norms about, well, all this. She cocked her head, tilting slightly as if his hesitancy were a delightful puzzle. Ah, restraint. Excellent. That builds suspense. Anticipation is important. Humans enjoy surprise, yes? He wanted to scream but instead shuffled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet and the laundry basket that had become an impromptu barricade. By mid-morning, the chaos had spread. The alien girl wandered into the common hallway for a demonstration, and he followed reluctantly, dragging a chair and covering himself with every article of clothing he could find. As he peeked through his improvised shield, he realized the neighbors were already gathering. Tentacle-limbed beings, floating orbs, and a crystalline humanoid all watched with curious expressions. He tried to whisper that it was a cultural misunderstanding, but her gestures made his protests meaningless. She bounced, pirouetted, and stretched, demonstrating the greeting, in ways that were increasingly elaborate, each movement leaving him red-faced. One of the tentacled neighbors waved at him knowingly, Or maybe mockingly, and he shrank further into his barricade. She turned her attention to him specifically, beaming. "You are resisting beautifully," she said, stepping closer in a way that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. He attempted a dignified stance, only to lose balance and almost fall into a decorative water fountain. She giggled, reaching out to steady him, her touch warm and unexpectedly gentle. That brief contact sent a confusing jolt through him, part embarrassment, part adrenaline, part something he didn't yet have words for. He jerked back, knocking over a potted plant, and she laughed again, covering the mess with a dramatic sweep of her hand as if the spill were part of the performance. Later, in the cramped kitchenette, he tried to reclaim some sense of control. He busied himself with pouring coffee, hoping the mundane task would shield him from her antics. But she appeared behind him, leaning casually against the counter, hands resting where hands should be but weren't. "I thought visual greetings would be easier with sustenance," she said, as if serving him breakfast while half-naked was completely normal. He choked on his own disbelief and accidentally spilled coffee onto his shirt, which she immediately reached to help clean, brushing against him with casual intimacy. His protest came out in a strangled, "No, it's fine. Really," and she smiled knowingly, clearly enjoying his discomfort. By afternoon, the situation escalated further. She insisted on practicing her greetings in communal areas, the laundry room, the elevator, even the lobby. Every time he tried to intervene, she interpreted it as playful teasing and redoubled her efforts. At one point, he tried to hide in the laundry chute, which led to a series of alarms and panicked neighbors swarming in, assuming some kind of emergency. She floated above him, laughing and gesturing for him to join, while the inspector drones buzzed past, scanning. He tried to explain, waving his hands frantically, but the aliens only nodded sagely, as if the human's distress were a positive example of interspecies etiquette. Despite the chaos, something strange began to happen. The human noticed the alien's charm, the way she laughed at his clumsy reactions without cruelty, how her movements had a natural grace, and the mischievous sparkle in her eyes. A tiny flicker of admiration sneaked past his embarrassment. She leaned over, adjusting the edge of his blanket with delicate precision, and he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with modesty. His mind scrambled to categorize the feeling: attraction? Admiration? Terror? Somehow, they were all tangled into one explosive mix. As evening fell, he tried to escape to the roof for some semblance of privacy. She appeared moments later, peering over the edge with a bright smile. "View greetings are best with a panorama," she said. He groaned, sinking to his knees. The lights of the city below reflected off her shimmering skin, making her look ethereal and ridiculous at once. He realized he could fight this forever and still lose. She was unstoppable, and his modesty was no match for her boldness. Yet as he watched her dance lightly along the rooftop, balancing with impossible ease, he felt a peculiar, reluctant thrill. Perhaps human norms weren't the only standards worth following. Perhaps there was room for laughter, for absurdity, for connection that transcended embarrassment. By the time he returned inside, dripping from rooftop rain and humiliation, the alien girl had already prepared dinner, or something resembling it for human consumption, and greeted him with the same mischievous smile. "Tomorrow we continue," she said. "You will improve in bravery, and I will improve in, patience perhaps." He stared at her, exhausted, flustered, and faintly smitten. The apartment, once a place of lonely refuge, had transformed into a theater of chaos, comedy, and unexpected possibility. He realized then that surviving her greetings would require more than hiding. It would require strategy, humor, and maybe, just maybe, the willingness to let a little of himself be seen, even if the entire building could watch. The night ended with him curled on the mattress again, blanket wrapped tightly, still trembling from repeated exposure and the unrelenting absurdity of the day. Somewhere, beyond the walls, laughter and alien chatter continued unabated, but this time, he found a strange sense of anticipation amidst the panic. Tomorrow promised more embarrassment, more chaos, and perhaps, in some absurd, cosmic way, the start of something he had never expected, a connection that was equal parts terrifying ridiculous, and thrilling. The following morning, he woke to a faint vibration in the walls, the unmistakable hum of alien activity spreading through the apartment complex. He rubbed his eyes and tried to steel himself, knowing that today's encounters would be no less chaotic than yesterday. The alien girl was already up, moving with a fluidity that defied physics, stretching in ways that made him flinch involuntarily. Her eyes glimmered with the same mischievous intensity, and she greeted him with a cheerful, "Good morning! Ready for the next stage of visual training?" He groaned internally, wrapping his towel around himself as though it were a shield against both nudity and embarrassment. By mid-morning, it became clear that there would be no private space today. She had taken it upon herself to introduce him to the wider complex in the most literal sense possible. Every hallway became a stage. Every doorway a theater. As he tried to navigate the narrow corridors, she glided ahead, performing her greetings to everyone they passed. Tentacle neighbors peeked from behind doors, crystalline beings shimmered in curiosity, and even the hovering inspector drones lingered longer than necessary. He stammered attempts to explain, waving his hands, pointing to clothing, gesturing frantically that humans did not greet in this manner. Each protest was ignored, misinterpreted as playful banter or encouragement, which only spurred her to more elaborate poses and displays. The laundry room was the next battlefield. She floated past the spinning machines, arms outstretched, demonstrating greetings in what seemed like every possible orientation, even attempting a mid-air pirouette that nearly knocked over the detergent containers. He tried to intervene, stepping in front of her, but she interpreted it as an invitation to incorporate him into the choreography. He ended up entangled in clotheslines and sudsy fabric, the alien girl laughing as she guided his movements like a dance instructor leading a hopeless student. The neighbors were lined up outside, watching through the glass partitions and placing wagers on how long he could last without fleeing. He blushed furiously, realizing that every human instinct for modesty was being weaponized against him. Evenings were no refuge. She had discovered that the communal balcony offered an audience for maximum effect. As the sun dipped below the neon skyline, she performed an intricate greeting ritual, incorporating reflections from glass panels and puddles on the wet floor. He tried to hide behind potted plants and chairs, creating what he thought were effective barriers. She floated around each obstacle effortlessly, laughing, and guiding him to participate in what she called a reciprocal display of trust. In the midst of panic, a flicker of something unexplainable arose within him, a sense of admiration, or maybe attraction, for her audacity and grace. His pulse quickened, and he felt a confusing thrill whenever she came close, accidentally brushing against him with the softest touch. Midweek, the chaos escalated further. The alien girl had begun inviting other tenants to join in what she termed cultural integration exercises. He tried to protest, claiming modesty, human decency, or simple sanity, but each objection was twisted into encouragement. He found himself standing on tables, demonstrating visual acknowledgement, while she floated around orchestrating the scene like a conductor leading a symphony. One of the tentacle neighbors held up a sign that read, in alien glyphs, "Best human performance yet," and the human's ears turned redder than he thought possible. He attempted to maintain composure, but every movement was met with laughter, admiration, or some combination of the two, leaving him simultaneously embarrassed and inexplicably exhilarated. Through all of this, a subtle romantic tension began to emerge. Amid the chaos, he noticed the way she observed him, not merely as a participant, but as someone whose reactions fascinated her. When he faltered or panicked, she would offer a small, gentle gesture, an adjustment of a towel, a guiding hand, or a playful nudge, each one sending an unexpected shiver through him. He found himself analyzing every motion, every smile, realizing that beneath the absurdity lay a personality that was both confident and endearing. He hated to admit it, but he was beginning to look forward to her chaotic energy, even if it destroyed every notion of privacy he had ever held dear. One evening, during a particularly elaborate demonstration, he slipped on the wet floor of the communal lounge and landed sprawling. She was immediately at his side, helping him up with a laugh and a teasing comment about human clumsiness. The neighbors applauded, and the hovering inspectors hummed in approval, but for him, it was a fleeting moment of intimacy. For a brief second, the embarrassment faded, replaced by the realization that she genuinely cared for his well-being in her own alien way. He felt a strange warmth, a combination of relief and connection, that had nothing to do with the performance, and everything to do with her. Later, as they retreated to their room, he found himself flopping onto the bed in exhaustion, trying to make sense of the day. She perched nearby, watching him with a grin that suggested both mischief and pride. "You are improving," she said softly. "Your reactions are delightful." He groaned, burying his face in the blanket, but couldn't suppress a small, embarrassed smile. Amid the ridiculous, public chaos, he began to recognize the beginnings of something neither of them could have anticipated, a bond forged in laughter, embarrassment, and shared absurdity. By nightfall, the apartment was quieting down, but the energy between them lingered. He could feel it in the way she lingered near the doorway, the way she adjusted a stray blanket around him, the subtle brush of her hand that was both accidental and intentional. He realized that surviving the alien girl's greetings required more than strategy or covering up. It required embracing the ridiculous, finding humor in exposure, and perhaps, slowly opening his heart to someone completely unlike him. For the first time, he considered that the chaos might not just be an assault on his modesty, but a strange, exhilarating path to connection, and maybe, if he dared, something more. The night ended with him staring at the ceiling, exhausted, humiliated, and yet tingling with a curious mixture of relief and anticipation. He had learned, in just a few short days, that navigating life with an alien roommate required flexibility, a sense of humor, and the willingness to be vulnerable. And despite every instinct screaming otherwise, he found himself secretly looking forward to the next day's absurdity, to the next greeting, and to the unpredictable, thrilling chaos that had begun to weave itself into the fabric of his life. By the fourth morning, he had begun to accept the new rhythm of his life, though accept might be too strong a word. It was more like he had learned to brace himself with a mixture of dread and reluctant anticipation. The alien girl was already in motion, gliding across the room with her usual effortless grace, performing stretches that made him clutch the edge of the bed for stability. She paused midair, beaming at him. "Today, we refined the greetings. Precision, timing, emotional resonance," she announced, as if describing a harmless craft project rather than a display that had him blushing for days. He groaned, adjusting his makeshift towel armor and reminding himself that he had survived worse, though he wasn't entirely sure how. The morning quickly escalated into chaos as she insisted on practicing in the common spaces again. This time, however, she had devised an elaborate, cultural demonstration for the building. He found himself swept along, half-dragged, half-pulled by her enthusiastic energy. The neighbors, by now accustomed to the recurring spectacle, gathered in clusters, some taking notes, some placing humorous bets, and others simply applauding. He tried to maintain a semblance of dignity, but every attempt to shield himself was effortlessly circumvented. She floated past his barricades, pirouetting with laughter and encouraging him to engage fully, which in her terms meant flailing along in an awkward mimicry of her gestures. Somewhere in the madness, he began to notice the subtler, almost humanizing qualities in her actions. When she adjusted his towel so it wouldn't slip, it was done with a careful attentiveness that contrasted sharply with the chaos of her displays. When he stumbled over the furniture or misstepped in the hallways, she would catch him lightly, her touch warm and reassuring rather than playful or teasing. The small gestures began to build a fragile bridge between them, and he caught himself watching her in moments of calm, appreciating the elegance and mischief woven into her every motion. Despite the absurdity, a thread of affection was starting to form, fragile and new, but undeniable. By midday, the neighbors and inspectors had fully embraced the spectacle. Some had begun performing exaggerated bowing, waving, or imitation gestures, while others whispered speculations about the strange human-alien duo. One particularly audacious neighbor even brought a holo camera to record the most entertaining display of interspecies etiquette ever witnessed. The human felt a surge of panic at the thought of footage circulating, but the alien girl simply floated beside him, giving him a sly wink that suggested she found his reaction both amusing and endearing. In that moment, he realized the absurdity was part of her charm. It wasn't meant to humiliate but to involve, to connect, and, surprisingly, to entertain. Later, in the narrow kitchenette, he attempted to regain some private dignity by preparing a snack. She appeared uninvited, leaning casually against the counter, her presence filling the small space. She reached over to adjust the utensil in his hand, and the contact sent an involuntary shiver through him. "You are improving," she said, voice melodic and teasing. "Your comprehension of the greeting is progressing nicely," he grumbled, trying to suppress the flush on his face, yet couldn't stop the small, reluctant smile from forming. Something about the way she navigated the world, confident, playful, and unabashed, was intoxicating, and he found himself caught between embarrassment and fascination. The afternoon brought the final test of endurance, a communal party for the building. She had orchestrated it as a celebration of interspecies camaraderie, complete with food, decorations, and what she called greeting stations, scattered throughout the rooms. He tried to retreat to a corner, hiding behind a stack of boxes, but she found him immediately. Floating up beside him, she extended a hand and smiled warmly. "Participation is essential," she said. He sighed, resigning himself to another round of chaos, but this time, he noticed how the neighbors had begun to respect the rhythm, clapping in support instead of gawking. The embarrassment was still there, but it had transformed into something more playful, almost enjoyable. During the party, there was a fleeting, quiet moment. He was cornered near the balcony, holding a drink for cover, when she leaned down beside him, brushing a strand of his hair back with delicate precision. Her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, the rest of the chaos faded, the hovering inspectors, the whispering neighbors, the ridiculous performances, everything receded, leaving only the two of them suspended in an unspoken understanding. A laugh escaped her lips, soft and genuine, and he found himself laughing too, despite the tension that had defined their relationship for days. The absurdity remained, but it was no longer purely humiliating. It had become the framework for a fragile connection. By nightfall, the building had quieted, but the energy between them lingered. He sat on the mattress, still wrapped in his towel, and she perched nearby, her shimmer soft under the dim lights. She offered him a small, teasing smile, and he returned it, hesitant but sincere. "You survived today," she said lightly. "I am proud of your progress." He groaned, partially from exhaustion, partially from the lingering blush of repeated exposure, but there was a warmth in his chest that hadn't been there before, a recognition of shared amusement, connection, and maybe even affection. As the night deepened, he realized that surviving life with her wasn't about hiding or avoiding embarrassment. It was about embracing the chaos, finding humor in every over-the-top gesture, and allowing himself to be vulnerable in ways that humans rarely permitted. She had torn down his barriers, forced him into ridiculous situations, and yet, in doing so, had opened a door to something unexpected: companionship, laughter, and the subtle beginnings of a bond that defied species, norms, and logic. Just as he was settling into the rhythm of this strange, unpredictable life, she floated over, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Tomorrow," she said, grinning, "we practice greetings with the rooftop view. The neighbors have requested a full performance." He groaned, but this time, it was tinged with anticipation rather than dread. He had learned that he could not escape her energy, her charm, or the hilarity she brought into his life. And, in a way that surprised him, he didn't want to. As he closed his eyes, exhaustion and exhilaration mingling, he realized that in the absurd, chaotic, and utterly unmodest world she had created, there was also space for laughter, human ingenuity, and maybe, just maybe, the first spark of interspecies romance.